I sat close to an ornate column, not directly behind it, just far enough to be out of sight from the head of the table. That seemed very much by design. My chair rocked a bit, one leg unsteady against the gleaming marble floor of Carrington Manor's dining room. I readjusted my silk scarf, which I had painted myself during a peaceful spring in Eugene. Nobody mentioned it. Nobody inquired about how I was feeling. On my left, my cousin Grant fiddled with his cufflinks and questioned Miranda about the progress on the apartment in Rome. Opposite me, my brother Henry chuckled at a joke he hadn't actually told, while my mother, Margot Calloway, raised her wine glass with that refined poise that once decorated the pages of New Traditions. She hadn't so much as glanced at me since my entrance. Then came a hushed voice. "She's not even a true Carrington," my mother murmured to the person seated on her right, her voice so quiet she must have thought no one else would notice. Yet I overheard, as did the attorney positioned at the head of the table. His name was Clayton Greaves. For many years, Clayton had served as my grandfather's legal advisor. His hair gleamed silver, his tone remained carefully controlled, and his eyes swept the gathered crowd with the precision of a surgeon examining a patient. I waited until silence fell over the room. "We have assembled to carry out the last will of Augustus Llewellyn Carrington," he began. "A man known for strong beliefs, though not always popular ones." A few subtle laughs fluttered around. I stayed silent. Piece by piece, the will unfolded like a staged act. The apartment in Rome, as everyone assumed, was left to my sister Miranda. The vineyard property in Medford went to my brother Henry. My father Gregory received the Mercedes collection. The jewelry, stock, and heritage assets were accounted for. Everybody received their share, except for me. I sat motionless. Growing up as Eliza Harrow, I learned well how to be invisible, technically a Carrington by blood, but emotionally always slightly out of place within their gleaming enigma. I chose to become an art teacher at a public school in Eugene, Vermont. That choice alone had been enough to cast me out. I suspected it was possible I would never even be mentioned again. Then Clayton Greaves pushed his glasses into place and at last spoke, addressing the majority stake in Carrington Heritage Group, Salem House, and the Unified Investment Portfolio, which was estimated at $413 million instantly. Everyone froze in place. "I now leave all of these holdings entirely to Ms. Eliza Rowan Harrow." The silence that followed was heavier than cut stone. My mother Margot's wineglass crashed to the floor. My brother Henry leapt up so fast that his chair screeched across the tiles. Miranda gave a sound that was half gasp, half derisive laugh, but remained silent. I stayed still. Not quite yet. I met Clayton's gaze. His eyes found mine, and he gave the barest hint of a nod. Then before anyone could say a word, he continued, "There's a video message from Mr. Carrington to introduce this section. Following his request, it will be shown now." Suddenly the screen flickered on, revealing my grandfather, Augustus Llewellyn Carrington, gazing directly into the camera. "If you're seeing this," he started, "then you've just discovered something you weren't anticipating." He offered me a gentle smile. "I suspect the room is in chaos," he added. His observation was accurate, and I couldn't have guessed what was coming after that. My grandfather's voice faded away, though his image stayed paused on the display, composed, deliberate. Before any more words began, my thoughts had already drifted back to the moment I first realized I felt unseen. I was 12 years old. Miranda had recently taken first place at a regional debate tournament, and there was a dinner in her honor at Carrington Manor. My mother had ordered a specialty cake adorned with Miranda's portrait in edible gold. I created a card and painted it by hand, using shades of burnt umber and ultramarine. I still hadn't figured it out. I set the card down at Miranda's spot at the table. When everyone sat down to eat, the card had disappeared. Later, I found it thrown away in the trash. a red wine stain blotting out the words. No one mentioned it. It was always like that. From then on, I stopped trying to be noticed. When I was 17, I informed my parents that I had been accepted to the Pacific Coast Institute of Fine Arts. My mother Margot hesitated only briefly before remarking, "I guess we'll be forced to act as though that matters." That evening, my grandfather, Augustus Llewellyn Carrington, phoned me. It was just him, honest and direct. "Don't wait for their approval," he told me. "They'll never applaud what they can't grasp." That was the first occasion he ever used that nickname for me, Eliza. Augustus attended one of my student art shows. He never made his visit known. I realized he'd come because a handwritten message was left hidden behind the frame of my collection of watercolors. The earliest one had a damaged entrance. Nothing could be more honest. I decided to leave it as it was. He never claimed responsibility. He didn't need to. When I was in my early 20s, I relocated to Eugene and began teaching at a public high school, eventually launching arts initiatives for elderly residents. The majority of my relatives assumed I lived in Vermont. I always let that assumption stand. Miranda attended the Bentley School of Management. Henry continued in our father's financial footsteps. Each year, the holiday greetings featured posed photographs and fancy imprinted signatures. Mine never showed up. Come December, I gave up waiting for the mail. There was a time when my name was omitted from a contributor plaque at a family get-together, despite me having given more than both Miranda and Henry combined. When I inquired, my mother Margot responded with a gentle smile and said, "Oh, that was likely an administrative error." These things happen, but apparently only to me, not to Miranda or to Henry. Still, every couple of years, a modest envelope would appear. No indication of sender. Enclosed was a clipping from a newspaper, a ticket from a museum, or occasionally a phrase inscribed in fountain pen ink. One note read nothing more than, "Character is more subtle than legacy." All of these mementos I stored inside a shoebox beneath my bed. The glow of the screen wavered. The footage picked up once more. My grandfather bent forward, his gaze narrowing as if determined to cut through time itself. "All of you have become accustomed to confusing shine with value," he remarked. "But for the last 18 years I focused not on the things you said, but rather on what you deliberately overlooked." My sister adjusted her seat. My brother started to speak, but then stopped himself. Meanwhile, I sat still, feeling that now familiar scarf around my throat, wondering whether Augustus had always been watching me, or if he was trying to teach me to look more closely at myself. 4 weeks prior to the reading of the will, I received a letter. The cardstock was thick, a deep cream color, featuring a raised crest, and my name written in ink that looked as if it had never gone through a printer. My acceptance letter from S.E. Maplewood Public School in Eugene, Vermont arrived, but I didn't immediately open it. I allowed it to rest beside my ceramic bowl of clementines on the kitchen counter, untouched for nearly 3 days. When I finally opened it, the message was straightforward. "You are requested to be present at the reading of the last will and testament of Augustus Llewellyn Carrington. Location: Carrington Manor, Salem, OR. Date: May 12th. Time: 11 a.m. There was no indication of any inheritance. I had no sense of what to expect, only that my presence was requested, not demanded or invited, but simply requested. 3 days later, my mother Margot phoned me. It was the first conversation I'd had with her in 8 years. "Eliza," she began, her tone crisp and refined. "I suppose you've gotten the notice." I held the phone about an inch from my ear. "Yes." "Well, make sure you look appropriate. There would be solicitors for the family, as always." "Naturally," I agreed. She hesitated. After that, she remarked that Augustus, my grandfather, had been fond of me. No one was really to blame. Some men become nostalgic as they grow older. I kept silent, She didn't require a reply from me. Her sign-off was, "See you then, dear." That concluded the conversation. I reserved a seat on a train rather than catching a plane. The thought of arriving in a hurry made me uneasy. Instead, I spent 11.5 hours by the window, observing as spring slowly moved up the Vermont coast in splotches, dogwoods flowering like hidden confidences. I put on the same scarf I'd painted in the year when I finally quit asking to be welcomed home again. I couldn't say why I included it in my bag. Or perhaps, deep down, I did know. Maybe it served as a shield. When the gates of Carrington Manor came into view, grand and unnecessarily elaborate, an unfamiliar sensation washed over me. It wasn't anger or sorrow. What I felt was a peculiar sense of intrigue, almost like stepping into a museum displaying fragments of a childhood I scarcely recalled, yet could still navigate without a guide. Inside, nothing had changed since the last time I had been there. I noticed the lingering scent of jasmine drifting in from the windows. My heels echoed hollowly against the Italian tile floors. People greeted each other with voices pitched ever so slightly too high, as though trying to outshine whatever unease lingered by sheer cheerfulness. No one welcomed me when I arrived. However, nobody asked me to go, so I remained where I was. I claimed the seat beside the column and settled in, waiting to learn the reason behind the gathering. The initial 35 minutes of the will reading dragged on much like a badly rehearsed stage production. Everyone acted as though they weren't waiting for their turn, yet their eyes darted toward Clayton Greaves with every breath he drew. The apartment in Rome naturally went to my sister, Miranda, while the vineyard in Medford was left to my brother, Henry. Predictably, the set of silverware went to my father, Gregory, and the jewelry to my mother, Margot, along with a note in my grandfather Augustus's handwriting that simply said, "For appearances." Some tense chuckles filled the air. No one questioned the intent behind those words. I sat in silence as the presents were distributed, acknowledgments of allegiance more than anything. Every gift was accepted with subtle affirmations. Nods, a lift of the brow, muted signs of approval my relatives often confused for affection. I started to suspect that my name might never come up. Maybe I had misunderstood it all. The messages, the scarf, the hushed visits. Maybe deep down, he did care. Just not enough to disrupt the status quo. That's when Clayton Greaves adjusted his spectacles. At last, he announced that the controlling shares in Carrington Heritage Group, Salem House, and the consolidated portfolio had a total value of $413 million. A collective gasp swept through everyone present. "These holdings," he declared, "are thus given outright to me." It took a moment for the quiet to fully settle in. Recognition dawned only after a heartbeat. That was when my mother Margot's wineglass slipped from her grasp. The stem broke before it ever reached the ground. My brother Henry jerked to his feet so abruptly that his chair screeched across the tiles and crashed into a marble table leg. Miranda Calloway's eyelids fluttered once, then twice, before she abruptly shifted her gaze to Clayton Greaves. My father stayed motionless, except his grip whitened as his fingers pressed tightly to the table's edge. Suddenly, every gaze locked onto me. I didn't so much as flinch. In a family that craved theatrics, I had discovered the strength that comes with composure. Clayton cleared his throat to break the tension. "There's one more thing," he announced. At Mr. Augustus Llewellyn Carrington's direction, I was instructed to listen to a recorded message. One of the staff lowered the lighting. Once more the monitor glimmered to life. There, on the screen, appeared my grandfather, Augustus Llewellyn Carrington, seated at his longtime oak desk, the one adorned with lion's feet and secret compartments. The glow around him was gentle, as if he had anticipated exactly what this moment would feel like. As he observed this, he commented that witnessing such a scene meant I had just encountered something unforeseen. Or maybe, he implied, not unforeseen at all. He offered a faint smile. For me, legacy is something I now see as being defined less by financial assets and more by the virtue and substance of character. I let my gaze wander over the crowd, almost as if searching for a response. Many of you, he seemed to suggest, have confused outward refinement for actual integrity. My mother shifted in her chair. My father let out a breath through his nostrils. My sister's face remained unmoved. During the last 18 years I've been observing, he went on. He wasn't referencing performance statistics, but rather the kinds of decisions people made. Minor decisions. The silent and unassuming ones. He began to enumerate these moments. For instance, when my mother Margot declined to extend medical help to the housekeeper's relatives following her illness. Or when my father Gregory concealed an 8-figure deficit using an offshore company in the Cayman Islands. Or when Henry discreetly resolved an accusation of misconduct, ensuring there was never an admission of guilt as one might expect. Or when Miranda persuaded a whistleblower to resign from the charitable division once the incident became public. Everybody remained silent. The conversation was cut off. The atmosphere in the room seemed frozen in place. And then he finally addressed me by name. Eliza, he said, turning at last. I felt my breath hitch in my throat. I had never requested a place among their ranks at this table. I had created a place of my own. He moved subtly closer. True character doesn't act for show. It endures. After that, the video concluded. For a brief moment, nobody uttered a word, until my sister Miranda broke the silence with her question. I was almost stunned that she still had the audacity to speak up and ask, "So, is this open to challenge?" Clayton paused and gave a slow blink. From a legal standpoint? No. Augustus made certain the board reviewed the changes thoroughly. The arrangement of the trust is already in effect. There was another pause as I sat in my seat near the column, reflecting, had this always been intended for me, or was I simply the only one left in the end? That evening, I found it impossible to fall asleep. It wasn't because I felt happy, nor was it a sense of victory. There's a peculiar isolation that comes from being understood all too well, as if I'm suddenly illuminated after years spent out of sight. I stretched out on the guest bed in the Eastern Suite, a room once set aside for reporters. The bedding still carried the scent of lavender mingled with starch. Through the window, the marsh grass rustled in the breeze, almost as if it harbored secrets it wouldn't reveal to me. My cell phone vibrated at 1:43 a.m. With a single new message from Miranda, I read her words. I think we need to talk. Just us sisters. Grandpa wouldn't want this to come between us. By 2:55 a.m., another message arrived, this time from Henry. Not judging, just confused. This doesn't make sense. Maybe the lawyers can sort it out. Then at 3:17 a.m., I received the inevitable call. It was my mother, Margot. I didn't answer, and let it go to voicemail instead. In her message, she said, "Eliza, I'm not upset. I think this is a lot for me right now. I may not understand how this kind of thing is handled. We should sit down with the family's attorney and sort through everything as a group. There's a great deal we need to go over." Augustus was elderly. He could have been persuaded. I never spoke those words, but I heard them just the same. It sounded rehearsed, almost like the kind of line she might use with benefactors, journalists, or staff she wanted to quietly usher away. When morning arrived, I still hadn't answered. My suitcase was ready, yet I had no idea where I was headed. Carrington Manor felt nothing like somewhere I belonged. Instead, it reminded me of a place abandoned by someone who had seen too much. Hoping to find some clarity, I entered the library, only to have a staff member walk up to me. "Ms. Harrow," he addressed me, "there's something here for you." It arrived with specific instructions. In his hand was a sealed envelope, addressed plainly with my name. My full name appeared in handwriting I would recognize anywhere, even with my eyes closed. Inside, the page began, Eliza Rowan Harrow, and it was a letter. Eliza, if this is in your hands, I've chosen actions I couldn't bring myself to speak. I realize this inheritance won't seem like a blessing right now. To start, it is a weight. It was always obvious to me. I alone grasped the distinction. I wouldn't require their assistance, though I might still feel compelled to support them. That is both my gift and my vulnerability. I remind myself, never let compassion become a shackle. The business belongs to me. The heritage is mine as well, but my existence remains mine alone to determine. I must not shrink myself simply to keep others at ease. E. My hand trembled as I held the letter. I went over it once more, not seeking understanding, but seeking reassurance. Augustus had foreseen that they would attempt to undermine my self-worth. He expected them to weaponize shame rather than anger. He anticipated that I might succumb to their tactics. Yet what Augustus provided surpassed financial inheritance. It was permission. My relatives called me to the conservatory. Of course, it wasn't issued formally. No one would actually say I was summoned, now that I was supposedly one of them again. Yet the intention was unmistakable. I knew everyone would be present, and it was merely described as a discussion. I deliberately entered 5 minutes late. When I arrived, everyone was already sitting down. My father sat by the window, his arms folded. My mother, dressed in a delicate light blue dress, seemed out of place given the harshness of her tone. Miranda and Henry sat on opposite sides of the curved couch, like rival attorneys. A pot of tea rested in the center, but no one had poured any for me. My mother Margot began to speak. This isn't about finances. Naturally, that wasn't really the matter at hand. It's about maintaining the legacy our grandfather Augustus established, my brother Henry added. We're not here to fight, my sister Miranda piped up, leaning forward. There's no need to do anything extreme. Just pass things off. Let Clayton oversee the handovers. It's unnecessary for me to handle things every single day. I stayed quiet. My lack of response lingered in the air. At last, my father Gregory broke the silence. Let's be honest, he truly cared for you. That isn't the problem, but you haven't had experience in this arena. I glanced at each of them in turn. None of them wanted the responsibility. Taking it back themselves would make them appear selfish. Their strategy was to make me doubt my own capability so thoroughly that I'd surrender it willingly. I spoke up, my voice measured, saying, I understand your concern. My mother Margot instantly looked more at ease. I understood, because not once had she asked about what I'd accomplished, what I'd created, who I was today. I moved forward a little. When you saw me painting scarves, you assumed I hadn't succeeded. When I was teaching, you took it as a sign of surrender. Because I was quiet, you decided I amounted to nothing. No one said a word. I reached into my bag, took out a folded document, and placed it before them on the table. My name has been on the legal paperwork for Carrington Heritage Group since 8 months ago. My grandfather Augustus named me acting CEO, with the position held in trust. He did it quietly, allowing me space to learn. My sister Miranda stared and blinked. That can't be true. It is, I replied. He brought me on board through a consulting agency when the rest of you weren't paying attention. I've been analyzing for 11 months, planning board moves and strategy. I overhauled 4 departments that everyone assumed Clayton handled. Henry stood up. Why was he keeping this from us? Because he was already certain I wouldn't pay any mind. I looked at my mother Margot. Had she forgotten the day she told me I wasn't truly a Carrington? She recoiled ever so slightly, but I noticed. I wasn't here for revenge. I don't require your endorsement. I'm not seeking a makeup supper or a fresh family picture. I am present because he trusted me to complete what he began, and I will see it through." Silence settled over the space. My mother Margot finally murmured, "You're different." I gave her a smile. "Not really. I've simply stopped diminishing myself." I picked up the teapot, filled my own cup, stirred it with care, and at last declared, "You ought to consider if you're truly able to take direction from someone you once disregarded." My sister's jaw set firmly. Henry fixed his eyes on the floorboards. With nobody saying another word, I gathered my tea and stepped out. Not from anger, but with a sense of conclusiveness. 5 months later, I found myself in the very heart of the Carrington Heritage Group boardroom, no longer as an outsider or a mere onlooker, but as the woman whose name had been newly engraved into the polished mahogany sign at the entrance. I am Eliza Rowan Harrow, Chief Executive Officer of Carrington Heritage Group. The changeover was far from silent. Some directors chose to leave. A handful of shareholders became alarmed, though most remained, not out of devotion, but rather a desire to watch. They were curious about what I, the family's so-called phantom daughter, would do with the fortune I was never expected to inherit. I didn't cause any destruction. Instead, I overhauled the foundation division of the group, reinstated the whistleblower initiative, and doubled the wages for all support staff. At our initial media event, I left my mother Margot, my father Gregory, my sister Miranda, and my brother Henry off the guest list, not as punishment, but so the absence could finally speak more loudly than their chatter ever had. Rather, I extended invitations to individuals whom my grandfather, Augustus Llewellyn Carrington, had discreetly supported: scholarship winners, retired caretakers, and local activists. A handful of them wept when they caught sight of his name engraved on the plaque at the lectern. I found myself in tears as well. When I delivered my inaugural speech, I avoided mentioning inheritance or family dynasty. Instead, I focused on the process of healing what had been harmed. On a few occasions, I would say, we received the wounds even more than the fortune, but we also gained the opportunity to make new choices. The audience responded with applause, genuine, even if not overwhelming. Later on, I made my way back to Carrington Manor. Climbing up to the top floor, I stepped into the aging art studio, a space left undisturbed for years. Augustus had kept it just as it was. The unfinished canvas depicting our family's marshland at sundown was still there. The sky remained incomplete, and a lone egret was outlined, its body never filled in. I thought back to the last moment I saw him touch that painting. "Are you ever going to finish that?" I had quipped lightly. He just grinned. "No, that's your task." Back then, I didn't grasp what he meant. In that moment, things shifted for me. I reached for the brush. The paint had already hardened, but that didn't bother me. I uncapped new tubes, creamy ochre, a soft blue, and the same ultramarine I'd favored when I was young, and began painting the sky. It wasn't flawless, not as Augustus might have painted it, but it reflected my own style. When I drew back, the egret had taken flight at last, and that was all I needed. During the following holiday season, my mother Margot sent me a card. There was no personal note, just a generic printout displaying a family photo. Miranda holding a wine glass, Henry by the tree, and Gregory in the background looking preoccupied. They had mailed it to the corporate headquarters. The inside greeting read, "Wishing you peace this season. You are, of course, always welcome." No names were signed, nor was there any admission of actions or inactions. No words of apology or recognition. Just that word, welcome. I set the card down as I sat at my desk, staring at it for a full minute before silently sliding open the drawer. From the same spot where I kept his letters, I retrieved the earliest one, the note that simply read, "Build the quiet thing." With a pen in hand, I wrote 3 words on the holiday card. I was present. Then I returned it to its envelope. No sender's name, nothing else inside. I sent it to Carrington Manor. Nobody wrote back. 10 days later, I went to the Westward Arts Gallery in downtown Salem, which now housed part of our expanded community art initiative. The walls displayed donated artwork by anonymous individuals who had never been able to express themselves publicly. In a rear corner, one of my own pieces was displayed. It was modest, a watercolor of a chair, its velvet worn, leaning slightly, hidden behind a pillar. I didn't stay to listen to people's responses. I exited using the side door, stepping directly into the cold winter breeze drifting from the harbor. I skipped wearing a scarf this time because it wasn't necessary,